Well, thank you for joining us today. What we're going to do is we're going to talk to you about using subversion in Altium Designer 10. I know that that's a capability that Altium has really pushed forth in the last major rev of their tool, and I want to show you today on how to install it, how to implement it, and to ask any, hopefully answer some questions that you may have in regards to things that may come up as you go along here. So we'll take it in strides here. First and foremost, in order to get Altium Designer to even use what are we using here? Yeah, using the subversion. In order to use this subversion, what we want to do first and foremost is go to Preferences and take a look at it. Now we are using Altium Designer 10, and with Altium Designer 10, what they did was they automatically built in or added subversion automatically to Altium Designer. So by default, if you go into the Preferences, again I went to DXP Preferences, this is the preference page here. I'm going to go into Data Management and expand it, and I'm going to go into Version Control, and you're going to see that by default it's going to say use built-in subversion. So right now it's using the built-in subversion. If you're not using it, you don't see any of the bubbles, and we'll talk all about that, and that's fine and dandy, but it's ready to go. In prior versions of Altium Designer, you actually had to install it and tell it where it was. Now Altium is providing it for you. Now what we're going to do with this particular demonstration is we're actually going to show you how to use the external subversion. But before we can even get Altium to look at a subversion externally, we need to go into a little more detail as to where to get it and what we want to install onto our machines. Okay, so let me cancel over here. What I'm going to bring up is the two executables that we downloaded in order to do this, and there's two of them that you want. The first one is the actual subversion engine itself, and that is provided by a company called CollabNet. It is an open source code, and so you can go to CollabNet, I believe it's collabnet.org. You can go over there and you can download it, and you do need to get a password and a username, but it's all free of charge, and you can download this particular engine. Now, one thing about subversion that you need to be aware of is the fact that they're constantly changing. It is an open source code. I think that there are changes almost on a monthly basis. So the one that we're using right now, as I'm demonstrating this, I think is already outdated. But it's really important that once you decide to use the subversion, that you stick to one, and that you know what, before you move on to the newer ones, understand what those changes were, because again, they really come fast and furious with these additional rev changes. Now, in addition to the CollabNet engine, the SVN engine, you'll also want to download something called Tortoise Subversion. And the reason why is that the Tortoise Subversion is one that you can use through the Windows Explorer on your OS. The one from CollabNet is just the one that Altium's going to use, and there's really no GUI interface to it. I believe that there's command line capabilities, but really it's a raw engine for those people who are creating applications, or if they want to do command line prompts. And that's what Altium is using here, as opposed to the Tortoise, which is more of a graphical user interface for the user. So that's what we've done over here, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to install them. Now, actually, before I do that, what's really important here is you'll see that this one's 1.7.5 and that the Tortoise is also for 1.7.5, and as I mentioned, the versions keep changing very quickly, so it's really important that you guys keep this in sync with each other. Okay. If you don't, you could have some problems with it. Like recently there was a change from 1.6 to 1.7, and it was a fundamental change. And so if you tried to run, let's say, the subversion client for 1.7 with Tortoise 1.6, you were going to have some problems with it. So it's really important that you download both of these and you put them in a safe place. They're not always easy to get a hold of later on, as these revisions are constantly being made. So let's take the first one. We're going to take Tortoise. We'll double click on it, and we will get its prompt. So you can see this right here, and we're going to press Next. Okay, and I'm going to accept the terms of the license agreement. Press Next. These are just things where it's going to place it. There's really nothing you have to do over here. It's going to put it in the default C program files, Tortoise SVN. That's fine. We'll press Next, and we'll install it. Okay. Now this is for 64-bit. If you have a 32-bit machine, there is the 32-bit executables for both the CollabNet SVN and for the Tortoise SVN as well. Okay. And this should take about a moment or two. It's not that big of a file. Okay, so now we're finished with this. Now we'll do the CollabNet one as well. So we'll double click on CollabNet, and this is the one that is going to come up. And we'll again press Next. And we'll just press next here. And again, this is where it's going to save it. Now, this one's actually important to kind of note because later on we have to tell Altium Designer where to find this particular engine. So this is under Program Files CollabNet, not Program Files SVN. It used to be like this many years ago, back in 2007, 2008. However, since CollabNet has kind of taken responsibility for the version control of Subversion, that's where they are storing it. And we will need to remember this when we install it for, or tell Altium where to link up to. So we'll install this at this point. Okay. And we're done with this now. So we're now completed, and there's always these links if you want to learn more about Subversion. All right, so now we have both of these on our machines. Let's go back over to Altium Designer. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to tell Altium Designer where to find the Subversion engine. So I'm going to go up to DXP, Preferences, and I'm going to bring up the preferences here, and I'm going to go under Data Management, and I'm going to click on Version Control, which is actually up right now as we speak. Okay, so I'm going to change it to the external Subversion, right? And I'm going to click on the auto detect. If it doesn't work, don't worry about it. You can try this here, and you can see that at this point in time it doesn't find it automatically, so I will tell it where it's located. So I'm going to click over here, all right, and I'm going to go into the computer, and I'm going to go into the program files, all right, and I'm going to go into CollabNet. Actually, let me bring this over here on the screen to make sure you can see it. So I'm on my C drive, program files, CollabNet, and I'm going to go into the Subversion client. And now you'll notice that there's a number of things over here. Now, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent, and it's something that's really important. It's something that you definitely want to do while you're working in Altium Designer, let alone Subversion. And I'm going to bring that up right now. I'm going to bring up, since I can't do this over here in this open command, I'm going to bring this up over here in the Windows Explorer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Organize, Folders and Search Options, and I'm going to go over to View. Now, there's two defaults that always occur when you install Microsoft 7, and we want to change those because they'll have an impact on what we're doing here. The first one is I'm going to turn off the hide extensions for known file types. Okay, and the second one is I do want to show the hidden folders, files, and drives. All right, and this is going to be really important because one of the things that we're going to see when we save things from the repo is a hidden folder called .svn, and that plays a big role in our ability to check in and check out. So again, make sure that this says show hidden files, folders, and drives, and make sure that the hide extensions for known file types is turned off and applied to all folders. It's going to prompt you, say yes, press OK. All right. So over here, what I'm going to do again is I'm going to go to Documents. All right. And, oh, pardon me, they're over here. Let me try doing F5 refresh. There we go. By doing the F5 refresh, I now see the executables, and the one I want to pick is svn.exe. Okay, so I'm going to press open, and you'll notice that the admin, the SVN admin, is also picked up automatically. So I can press apply here, and that will save the changes. Okay, and that's all we need to do at this point in time in order to get Altium to link up to the external SVN. Now, in a moment, we'll talk about design repositories, but right now we need to do a few things outside of this, and we'll show you how to do this both through Tortoise and through Altium Designer as well. All right, now there's two different ways to create a repo. One can certainly be done in Altium Designer. The other way is to use Tortoise, and I'll show both methods. Though keep in mind that normally, under most circumstances, you're going to create a repo and everybody in the group's going to use that one. So it's kind of one of these things that happens occasionally. It's not something that happens on a daily basis. It's the check-in and the check-out that normally happen on a daily basis, and we'll certainly go through that as we progress. But to create a repo, the first thing we need to have is a folder. So I'm going to click on New Folder, and I'm just going to call it Repo. And by the way, one of the things that I should mention here is that repo is being short for repository. You can give it any name that you so desire. So if it's a project name or a personal name that you want to put on it, you certainly can do that. Now this is an empty file, okay? Nothing in there, or empty folder. In order to create this as a repo, I'm going to right click on it, and again, because we have Tortoise Subversion, you can see that Tortoise has added these options into the right click menu. And I'm going to go to Tortoise SVN, and I'm going to go to Create Repository here. Okay. Now what's going to come up is a statement over here that says, okay, this is where you're going to save it. And notice this thing that says File over here, because there's actually a number of different ways that you can set up a repository. We're using what's called the file method, and that's what we're going to use for this demonstration. But there's also ones where you can do them through HTTPS or SVN. ones in which you actually create yourself a server that handles your repository, and there's certainly benefits to that. But for the purpose of what we're trying to do, we're basically going to use the directory system that's provided in the Microsoft OS in order to handle our directory. Okay, so I'm not going to create any folder structures for now, though when you start putting projects in, you'll want to create somewhat of a folder structure. And I do not wish to open the repo browser. It's something I'll show later on, but it's not something we have to open right now. So I'm going to press OK, and you'll notice that really nothing shows differently on the screen. However, if I go into the repo folder, you will see all these different files and folders. Now, one thing that's really important to note is that you're not to tinker or play in this area on your own accord. You really need to use Tortoise or you need to use Altium in order to get information in and out of it. You can look through these things if you want. Some of it's binary, and some of it is in ASCII. However, it's not very easy to read as to what is being stored in there, how they're configuring it. If you really want to get that deep into it, the source code is available for free, and you can see how the developers are putting everything into the repo. Okay. So now that I've got the repo all set up, what I'll do now is I'm actually also going to show you how to do this in Altium Designer. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again go into DXP, and I'm going to go into Preferences. Okay. And again, under Data Management, now we were under version control the last time, but now I'm going to go to Design Repositories. And there's two things that you can do in the design repositories. The first one is you can either connect to, or the other one is to create new. So first, let's connect to the one I just created. So I'm going to click on Connect To. Okay, and they're going to give me the option for both CVS and SVN. Now, CVS is really the grandfather to SVN. You can still use it in Altium Designer. However, most people have now migrated over to Subversion at this point in time, and so that's where most of the freeware development is being done. So I'll go to the Subversion, and the first thing it's going to ask you for is a name for this. So you can give it any name that you want, and it's kind of important because if you have a big list of things here, it's important to be able to quickly look at that name and know what that repository represents. So we can call it whatever we want to call it. In this case, I'll call it Demo Repo. Okay. Here again, as you talked about the method, here is the file method. You can see that there's other ones available, but again, for what we're doing, we're just going to do the file method. Then it wants to know where the location is, so we need to navigate to that. So now I'm going to navigate to the computer, and I'm going to navigate to the big drive. Okay, and there's our repo right here. We'll click on that. That's all I need to do, and I'll press OK. Okay, now if there were a number of different sub-project folders in here, we would show that as well if we wanted to make this very dedicated to a specific repo and its subfolder. But for now, we're just going to say, hey, this is where my repo is located, and that's where I want you to go. Always press the test button. The connection is okay. That means it knows where it's located. And not only that, it also means that Altium is able to use the external SVN engine that you recently put into Altium. So I'll press OK, and I'll press OK again. So now it's listed up over here. There's the name that I can refer to. It's active. This is the type of repo. It's a Subversion one as opposed to CVS. And again, the file, meaning that we're using the file system, and its link, and the status of it is okay. So if you create a repo and later on you delete the repo, you'd see an X over here saying I can't find it. Now, same thing for creating a new one. We'll create a new one. So again, it's going to give me the option. I'm going to pick SVN, and this one we'll call it AD created repo. Okay. The method is the file, and it wants to know where should we put this repository. So I'll click here again, go to Computer, and we'll go to the big drive. All right, and I'll click here on the big drive, and I'll make a new folder, and we'll call this AD repo. Again, you can give it whatever name you so see fit. You don't have to call it repo or repository, but give it something that is creative so that people know what the purpose of that repository is. And I'm going to press OK, and I'll press OK again. And now, not only did it get created, and I will bring up that window here, and that is, there we go. We'll just do it through here, and we'll create right here. And you can see now that these two have been created, and if I double click into it, you'll now notice it has the same format as the one we just created earlier on. And the icons will appear at times. Sometimes the OS takes a little bit of time to respond to it, or it's based off of some command that we click on where Tortoise activates it and puts the little icon on it. But they are both repos at this point in time. Okay. So now I've got these set up. What can we do with it? How do we check in, and how do we check out? All right. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to create a very simple project. I'm going to go File, New, okay, Project, PCB Project, and I'm going to do a File, New, and I'm going to create a schematic. Okay, so I have my schematic sheet open here, and I want to make it very simple here just so we can demonstrate the ability to do a check-in and check-out. So the first thing you'll notice is that there's nothing over here where my cursor is. And you normally, if you have Subversion up and running and this project is in Subversion, you will see little bubbles over here. Okay, we don't see that because even though we do have Subversion running and Altium can make contact with it, we have not told Altium to commit this to any type of Subversion repository. Okay, so I'm up over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a place, and I'm going to place some text string here. Okay, so place text string, and I've got this here, and I'm going to right click on this, and we will just say Designer A, and we'll say initial modifications. Okay, I'm also going to change the font because make it something a little bit bigger, easier on the eyes. So let's say 20-point font. We'll leave it as a navy here, and we will press OK, and we will place this in. There's my design. I'm done. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to save this at this point. So I'm going to right click here, and we're going to save the project. And so we will say Save Project. Okay. Now keep in mind, this is just a little bit of a trick for everybody out there, that if you try to save a project, the first thing it's actually going to ask you to save is the schematic document, because it really cannot save the pure JPCB without knowing what members of what basically files are available of this project. So that's the first thing it's going to ask us to do. So I'm going to click on the computer here. Actually, it's already been expanded. I'm going to click on the big drive. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to create a new folder, either by right-clicking or clicking on New Folder on the top. Okay. And we'll just call this Designer A. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to click on Designer A. All right. And then what I'm going to do over here is I'll give this a name, and we'll just call it PCB Project. And that's it. We'll just call it PCB Project SCH doc. And we'll press Save. Okay, now it's going to ask me to save the pure JPCB. All right, and we'll just call this PCB Project. Just keep it very simple, because what I want to emphasize here is how we do the check-in and the check-out. Okay, and again, it's going to be saved under Designer A here, so we'll do that. So now this is all saved up. All right, and what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to right-click, and you'll notice here on Version Control, and the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add project to Version Control. So it's going to ask me, where do I want to put this? Okay, now keep in mind I have two repos here. It really doesn't matter, but once you start doing this, you want to make sure that you keep to the same repository. So I'm going to actually keep it in the demo repo just to show that even if it got created in Tortoise, it will work just fine. So we'll use the demo repo. Okay, now one of the things I want to do is I want to create a new folder. I don't just want to dump this into the repo because it'll make a big mess if I add other projects in here. So I'm going to create a new folder, and we will call this Project 1. Okay, and other projects would come as we go along. So I'm going to press OK. Okay, so now Altium's saying, what do you want me to check in? And these are the things it's going to check in, and it's giving me the status because it looked in the repo and says, I don't have anything of this nature, and I'll press OK. You'll notice that these icons will appear. Now this doesn't mean that these have been checked in, it just means they're scheduled for addition. So we have to go right click again, Version Control, and now we commit the whole project. Okay. And what's going to come up is this here, and then you're going to get a comment. Now I really recommend the use of the comment. You don't have to put a name, and you don't have to put a date, because that information will already be captured within the version control. If you go to the repo browser, or if you use the storage manager in Altium Designer, it will give you that information. But this comment is really important, because if there's many changes that are made, or changes that are being made by your colleagues, this can help you decide which is correct, especially if you get in a situation where two people have gone off and now you need to merge. Okay, so I'm going to say that this is the initial draft of the project. Okay. Draft of the project. Here we go. Press OK. And now you'll notice that these became the green check marks. Now keep in mind I got only 2 files, so it happened very instantaneously. If you have a lot of things and they are very big files, it may take a while. If you're going over a network, it can take even longer. So do keep that in mind as well. So now these are checked in. We're good to go. Now what if I want to make some changes to this? Well, keep in mind that I still have my initial folder. That initial folder that I created, And let's bring it on up. Okay. And I'm bringing it up right now under computer. I'll do it over here since you can let you see what I'm doing here. I'm going to go onto the big drive, and if you look over here to Designer A, it still exists. These files still exist. I still can work in them. All I've done effectively is checked in from these projects into the repo. That's all I've done. So I can continue working here, and that's what we're going to do here. So let's say I did my initial modifications, but I added some more in here. So I'm going to do a Control-C to copy this. I'm going to drop in a Control-V. I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to say additional modifications. Okay, and I'll press OK. Now if I go to save this, you'll notice that this became an exclamation point, and you'll also notice that this went from red to gray. Okay, so what happened here? Well, I saved this, and this is being saved in my folder, but that does not mean that it automatically gets pushed up to the repository, and that's a very important thing to understand. I can be working on this all day long, and I can constantly be saving this, but that does not mean that the repo picks it up. In order for me to get this into the repository, I must right-click, version control, and I can do one of two things. I can either commit the whole project, or I can just commit the folder, the project, the file itself. And I'll just do commit the whole project so you can see what it looks like. It would go through the entire project, and it'll tell you those things that need to be modified. Okay, so I'll make another comment over here that I modified the original draft. And again, these are very vague, but I just want to get you into the idea of putting a comment in there. Okay, and we'll press OK. So notice now that this became a check mark. Okay, and if I close up Altium Designer and I come back to it the next day, it will show this. Okay. Alright, so what I want to do now is I want to introduce Designer B, because this is where things get very interesting. If you're designing on your own, you can see that you can create your own repository, and you can save stuff to it as you see fit. And if you open up Altium Designer later on, you know pretty much that whatever's in the repo is your stuff, and you're not worried about someone tampering with it. Well, what if you have to work with another individual? Well, things get a little interesting at that point. And one of the things you have to keep in mind with subversion is that subversion is what's called unreserved. Okay? And what unreserved means is that multiple people can check out and multiple people can check in. Unlike other systems where if you check out, everybody gets locked out until you check in, subversion doesn't really work that way. Okay? And so you have to be very careful about how you work things. You have to be very careful about the messages you see, and most importantly, you must communicate with those that you are working with. Now, otherwise you're going to come into some interesting situations, and we'll work through these various scenarios. So what I'm going to do now is, you'll notice that I've got this project up over here for for Designer A. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back over here, and I'm going to create the one for Designer B. So let's go back over here to my big F drive. And I'm going to right click, and I'm going to do new folder, and we're going to create Designer B. Okay. And actually what I'm going to do with Designer B, just so I can show it to you, is that now that I have Designer B, and by the way this would normally be on another computer, but I can demonstrate this on the same machine, is I'm going to right click, and I'm going to check out using Tortoise. So I can show you how to do that as well. So if I right click and I click on SVN Tortoise, okay, and it's going to ask me where the repository is located, and because this is the first time up, it's not going to have any information. So I'm going to click over here, and I'm going to have to navigate it to it. So I'll click on Computer, I'll go to the big drive F, and we put this in the regular repo, which is right over here, and I'll press OK. All right, and then I will click on this again just so that I can see that here's Project 1. All right, so I'm going to click on Project 1. Because if I try to open up just the repo itself, it would open up everything. So if I had 10 projects in there, it would actually open up all 10 projects, and we don't want to do that. I just want to open up Project 1, and then it's going to ask me where I want to check it out to, and it's by default picking up Designer B because I right-clicked on Designer B when I said to check this out. All right, I'm going to do fully recursive, and I'm going to use the head revision. The head revision is the latest revision, basically. If you ever have to pull up an older one, you can click on this and it'll show the log, and you can pull up an older version, but for now we're going to use the head revision. So I'm going to press OK, and now it's done, and I'm going to press OK. And if I click in Designer B, it's going to have the same stuff that Designer A has. All right, so let's put this away for a moment, and I'm going to go back into Altium. I'm going to do a File, Open. Okay. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to navigate over to Designer B. All right, I'm going to bring up Project PCB. Okay. And you'll notice that this is all in sync with each other as well. Now it dawned on me that I think I should show you how to check out in Altium Designer because there's a two-step process. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to I'll create a Designer C, though our demonstrations will be for Designer A and Designer B. So if I want to check out for the first time, what I can do is I can go into File and I go into Checkout. Okay? And very similar to what you saw in Tortoise, this is what it's going to show. It shows me the repo, and if there's other repos I want to look at, I can use them. I'm going to check out Project 1, and it's going to ask me where do I want to check it out to. So again, I'm going to go to Computer, I'm going to go onto my big drive, and I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call it Designer C. Okay. Press OK. And that's all I need here. I'm going to press OK. And you might see a little temporary dialog coming up showing the progress of it, but notice that this doesn't come up. So in Altium Designer, checking out does not mean opening. So if I do want to open it, I can go over to File, Open. At that point, I can go up to the drive here. Here's Designer C. It created it, and it has the same information. Now, for our purposes, I'm not going to introduce Designer C into this. I just wanted to show you how to check this out using Altium Designer. What I want to do is show you how it gets interesting now that A and B are going to start working on this. Okay, so let's continue with A over here. So A is going to continue his work here. So A, click on this, and we'll do a Control C to copy, Control V to paste. So Designer A has added even more changes. Okay. So these modifications have now been made, and I'm going to do a Control S to save, and you'll now notice here that there is a modified statement. Now what about this guy over here, Project B? Well, one of the things that's really important to do, especially if you know you're working with another person, is to always right-click and look at version control and do a refresh, because Altium's not going to automatically do that for you, and this is where a lot of problems can come into play. So if you went to lunch and you came back and you're working on a project and you know other people have access to it, the first thing to do is right-click, version control, refresh. Okay? And you'll notice that there's no change. Well, why is that? Because even though Project A saved their project, they did not check it back in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click back up to Project A here by clicking on this schematic doc. I'm going to right-click, version control, okay, and I am going to commit. This time I'll use commit so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so again, always add the comments in, so even more changes. Okay, and I'm going to press OK. All right, so you'll notice that this now has the check mark over here. But we have to be careful, because as I mentioned, that doesn't mean that this automatically refresh Project B. So let's right-click here and look at version control and refresh. And now we see a question mark. Well, why do we see a question mark? Because the subversion here detected that there is a folder, or pardon me, a file newer in the repo than the one that was checked out. Okay, and that's why they put the question here, because now the person who's got project, basically Designer B, has to find out, well, wait a minute, someone checked in something over here. Is it something that I can just simply download and write over what I've currently got, or is it something that I need to merge because I've already done some work on this? We'll take the simple scenario first. Let's say that he had just downloaded it and he refreshed and he realized, oh, someone just put something up into the repo. Okay, so what we can do over here is we can right click. Actually, before we do anything, I want to show you something, and that is I am going to open this up. Okay, so you'll notice that this is the current folder that the current file that Designer B has. Okay, so this is the one that they have, as opposed to A, because A had even more information in here. So if B comes along and says, well, I haven't done anything yet over here, and I just want to get the latest and greatest, well, then that's fine and dandy. They can right click here, go into version control, and they can update the whole project. So commit means that you're committing to the repository. Update means that you're asking the repository to update your project. Now when we do this, okay, it's going to say, well, what do you want to update? And we press OK, and you'll now notice that there is a check. Okay. Now if you had already started doing some work and you saved this, you would have gotten a warning, and we'll see that warning in a few moments. But also what you'll notice here is that in a moment Altium will refresh this, and it will look exactly the same. Okay. And it will take a moment for Altium to realize, oh, okay, I stomped on the one that was already in there, and that this is the one that it's going to look just like this. Okay. Pick it up. Yeah, now it picked it up, and you can see it now there. It does take a moment for it to pick it up. So keep in mind what happened was that the old file that was checked out literally got stomped on by Altium. It had to go in and make the changes to the subversion to update it, and then it updated its screen over here, and that can take a couple of seconds as we just witnessed. Okay. Now let's get into the scenario where it gets a little stickier. Okay. So what happens if A comes in and A says, I'm going to make changes. They made changes, but in this case they removed some of the changes. And let's go over to place, and we are going to put a line here, and we're going to draw a line through these because A realized they made a mistake. He doesn't like it. We're going to change the color here to red. Press OK. We'll make this line big and thick, and we'll press OK. All right, and we'll save this. Now, meanwhile, designer B is also doing his work on this. So let's do a Control C, and then Control V. And let's change this up a little bit. So let's say designer B modifications. Okay. And we press OK. All right. So now he saves his work. All right. Now we actually have what's called a branching effect because A and B have actually gone off, but they've done two different things. Right. Now whoever checks in first has got a little bit easier than the other person, but at the end of the day, everybody's going to have to meet up and merge. So let's take A here, and we're going to say A is not only saved, but now is going to do version control, commit the whole project, and they're going to say, in this case, removed some of the additional modifications. All right, and we'll press OK. So notice that this is a check mark over here. Okay. If B goes in and right-clicks and says, "Okay, my turn," it doesn't even know what A was doing. It says, "Okay, I'm going to check this in because I'm going to go to lunch." Version control, commit the whole project. Okay, and he says, "Well, added my design ideas." Okay, and I will press OK. Oh, what do we get over here? We're going to get an error message. And what is this? It says out of date. Why is it out of date? Because the file that designer B has is older than the one that just got checked in. And so that's basically a hint that says that, wait a minute, somebody's checked into the repo. Okay, and it's going to bail out. It's not going to allow it. And you'll notice the icon over here is an exclamation point, and it's going to say conflict. Okay. So what are the options that designer B has? Well, let's try a couple of them here. We're going to right-click. We're going to do version control, and we try to commit the whole project. It failed. It says, no, it's out of date. If B wants to lose his information, he can do update the whole project. But as we saw earlier on, if we do update the whole project, any work that project B had done is going to get stomped on. Okay, and so we have to be really careful about how we go about doing the merge. And what I want to show you right now is how to handle a merge situation like this. Okay, the first thing that B ought to tell A to do is, hey, it looks like you checked in. I have some work I need to do. Please do not add anything more because I need to merge back into the main here, the main repo, the head revision. Okay, so with the understanding that A has not done anything and will not do anything until this is completed, the next thing that B is going to have to do is going to have to do a temporary file to save this off to allow for an update from the repo. And this is done as follows. First and foremost, use File, Save a Copy As. If you use a save, it's not going to work because it's going to have the same name. If you do a save as, it's going to change this name over here, and then it won't match up with the repo anymore. And that's not what we want to do. We need to keep the same name, but what we want to do is save it into another file name. So I'm going to do a file, and I'm going to do a save copy as. Okay, so here's designer B, and I'll call this temp. Okay, we'll just call it temp here, and I'll press save. Okay, so this still gets preserved over here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a file open, and I'm going to open up the temp. Okay, and I'm going to press open. Okay, so now I've got this open. It's a free document. It's basically a temporary document. We don't want to even bother with it once we're done with what we need to do. All right, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click, and this is again Project B. I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to do version control, and I'm going to tell it to update the whole project. And again, this is going to stomp on those official files with whatever A committed. So I'm going to press this, and I'm going to say, yeah, go ahead, stomp on it, press OK. It's forewarning me you're going to lose these files. That's why we save this temp doc. And I'll press yes. Okay, and it's done so. Now if we give it a moment, this should now look like this. And again, we got to give it a few moments because Altium is going into the directory and it's changing the .svn, and it's got to update itself. All right, so it'll do that in just a moment. Okay, this is the temp project. So this is the one that we preserved, and this is the one that ultimately got stomped on. And there it is. Altium's now updated it. So what we would have to do now is we have to do a manual change. And yes, there are ways to compare these things. You can always go into project, and you can go into view the differences. So show physical differences. You can click on this over here. You can go into advanced mode, and you can say, hey, compare what I did to what I had here with the temp. Now that I've committed the new, checked out the old one from the repo to the new one. So you can certainly do this, okay? And that's one way you can determine what got changed. And it's a very useful way of doing it. So again, that's under project, show physical differences, or show differences. Either one of these will work for you. Okay, this is pretty simple. So what I would have to do at this point is I'd click on this and say, well, I want designer B mods in this. I'll do a Control C to copy that from the temp. I'll go over here and I'll drop this in. Okay, so now I've got my modifications in there. I am going to save this, so Control S. You'll notice I get the exclamation point here. Notice that this is not in version control, nor do we want it in version control. We're going to right click here. We're going to go to version control, and we will again commit the whole project. Okay, and I'll say, yeah, you're going to, actually I don't want the temp one. It sees it, but I don't want it. And we will say, okay, added designer B's mods and merged. Okay, and I'll press OK. And so now designer B is up to date. However, it's also the obligation of designer B to tell designer A that he needs to check out. Because if I refresh over here on version control, you'll now notice that A has a conflict. It doesn't know. It's out of date. Okay? And so again, if there's good communication between A and B, and A was told, hey, do not add anything until I'm done, all A needs to do at this point to get the latest and greatest is to right click, version control, update the whole project, press OK, and now both of them are back in sync, and that's how you do the merge. Okay, so the real important part of this whole thing, and you'll probably have to watch this a couple of times to kind of get the idea of this, but you really want to minimize merges. Okay, I know people want to all work on at the same time, and everybody always believes that if you got 3 or 4 designers doing the same thing at the same time, that you're somehow getting a benefit from that. But in the end, everything has to merge together, and you're not dealing with code here, you're dealing with graphics. And graphics require 2 pairs of eyes, and those pairs of eyes have to agree with what they're seeing over there so that you can get everything merged into one. You may have noticed the screen kind of did a little blip here, so keep in mind that now Altium, this project here for designer A and designer B match up with each other. Of course, the temp wouldn't at this point because it's not in version control. So, and at that point, you can close this and delete it as well. So that's what we have here for you, and I appreciate your time. I hope that I was able to answer some questions for you and make this very viable for you to use in your projects. Okay, what we're going to do at this point in time is I'd like to show you a little bit more about how to use the project physical differences. And so what you'll want to do a lot of times, again, if you need to do a merge, is you want to know what the difference is between one project versus the other. Okay, and there is a tool in Altium Designer that does that, and I mentioned it briefly, but I'd like to go into a little more detail about it so that you can make use of this tool. And that is found up in the projects, and you'll notice that there's 2 of them. One's called show differences, and the other one's called show physical differences. But there is a difference between the differences, and the show differences is basically checking the net list. Okay, and since there's really nothing over here, if we did click on this and we told it to check the differences, you're going to see that nothing's going to show up. Now keep in mind that our temp project over here is different from the one that we checked in. So if we click on this and we pick either one of these, since they're both checked in and they're both checked out on the same date, you're going to see that it's going to come up that there's no differences detected. Okay. Now to simplify this a little bit, I am going to close Project A's project so that we can easily find the difference between them. You'll notice that they have the same name, and that makes perfect sense because when we check them out, they're going to have the same name. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into projects, and I'm going to go into show physical differences. Okay, and again I'm going to go into the advanced mode. And this one's already selected for the FreeDocs PCB project temp, and this one over here I'm going to select on PCB project SCH doc. Okay, I'm going to press OK, and you'll see the differences at this point in time. So what are the differences? Well, keep in mind that one of them is the line that we added on. So if we click here, it brings you to the line. I'm going to just dock this for a moment to make it just get it out of the way. So you can see that the line was one of the differences, and you'll also notice over here that there is a difference here, what they call parameters. Okay, and the parameter one over here is basically saying that one of them doesn't have this parameter and the other one has a project parameter. Well, keep in mind that our temp file here is a FreeDoc, and that's why it's showing this parameter as not being filled in, as opposed to the PRJ PCB where it has a document parameter pointing to the PRJ PCB. Okay, you'll also notice that there is a difference in the strings. And just to prove this out, what we'll do here, for example, is we will add a resistor onto one of these. So this is the PCB project, and we'll add a resistor. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll run it again. So we'll go into project, okay, and we'll show physical differences. And again, we have to go to the advanced mode, and we'll pick on the project temp versus the PCB schematic document. And we'll press OK. And what we should see over here is not only was that line added in, but you'll also notice that the resistor is showing as a difference as well. The other aspect that we wanted to show you is I wanted to show you as well how can you look at prior revs if you wanted to see what type of revs are in there and what the change log looks like. So if you go into Altium, if you're in Altium Designer, if you click on System at the bottom right corner and you bring up the Storage Manager, okay, and I will undock this because the Storage Manager is just easier to see when it's undocked. So I'll bring this here and I'll expand it out. And you can see all the different revs that have occurred during that period of time. And that's why the comments are really important over here, because if people are constantly checking in, those comments are going to tell you where you are at that point in time as you're going along. Okay, and you can always compare them as well. You can always click on one and you can say Shift, pardon me, let's do a Control, and you can right click here and you can do a compare. Okay, and the same concept will come up over here as to what the differences were. And keep in mind, we didn't make a lot of changes to the original projects. There were very few changes when we were showing how to commit, check in, check out. So that's how you can possibly use the storage manager. Certainly something to play with. Now, another way you can look at this too is that if you don't have Altium Designer, you're a project manager, and you just want to see what's going on, well, you can do the same thing in Tortoise as well. So I'm going to click over here, just go up one directory. It doesn't matter which directory you're on. You can just right click on any directory. It doesn't even have to be the AD repo or the repo itself. And if you go to Tortoise SVN, you'll see something called Repo Browser. So if you click on the Repo Browser here, it's going to show you what information is there. Now keep in mind that this particular repo, we've never put anything in it, but the drop down here should have information. Okay, and now we can see this information over here. Okay, and we can go even further in. So we can right click on any of these and we can basically tell it to show the log. Okay, and then we can see all the information specific to each one of these revs that had been put in. Okay, and so you can see that modify the original draft, or you can click over here and see that the note here removes some of the additional modifications. Notice that the author over here is up here, so if you are working with your colleagues and hopefully it's showing their login names, then you can easily see who the author was. You can see the date, and of course here's the messages that you type in. Again, that's why the messages are really important. Even if they're a little bit cryptic, even if they're a little bit vague, at least it's better than having nothing. In my own personal experience, someone came up to me and asked me for the revision of a project that was sent off about 2 months earlier, and then they had started to make changes to it and they wanted to see the original revision. Well, because someone put in there that basically said this is the one that got sent to production, I was able to find out for them in about 5 minutes time, and I was able to basically check that one out for them and get them on their way.